So, time then for the press preview. It's our first look at tomorrow's front pages, and tonight we'll be taking a look at the papers with journalist and author Christina Patterson and the editor of the Jewish Chronicle, Jake Wallis Simons. Very good evening to both of you. Let's have a look at the front pages then, before we discuss them. Nursing Union chief in U-turn over pay deal is the lead in the Sunday Times, which says the leader of the Royal College of Nursing is now demanding a double-digit pay rise for her members, a change from her previous stance, and that patients now face the threat of more strikes. The Sunday Express leads with a promise from Prime Minister Rishi Sunak that he won't give in to pressure from the Archbishop of Canterbury and others, and will go ahead with a plan to house illegal migrants on barges while their asylum applications are processed. The People has a story about former PM Boris Johnson paying £3.8 million in cash for a house, which apparently has a moat. The Telegraph, meanwhile, reports that Labour will give the vote to millions of EU citizens if it wins the next general election. The sight of the Princess of Wales playing the piano for Eurovision in support of Ukraine is the main story for the Mail on Sunday. In fact, that picture on most of the front pages. The Mirror reports that I'm a Celebrity star Dean Gaffney is being treated for bowel cancer. And if your eyes can take it, the Star on Sunday has a picture of former X Factor star Wagner playing the bongos in the buff. Well, let's not linger on that. And a reminder, you can scan the QR code that you see on screen during the programme. Check out the front pages of tomorrow's papers while you watch us discussing them. To do just that, Christina and Jake. Right, let's get cracking. Let's start with the Sunday Express, shall we? Christina, Rishi's vow, I won't budge. My producer suggesting a better headline would have been PM won't budge over barge. Just explain what this row's all about.
Well, this is about the Archbishop of Canterbury has criticised the Tory plan to hold migrants who come across the channel on the small boats on what they're calling barges. I mean, whether they're actual barges, I'm not sure, but basically not in fancy hotels. And Justin Welby thinks this is uncompassionate. I think he is opposed to the entire policy. And Rishi Sunak is saying, I'm going to stand firm, not least because it's very important for the right wing of his party that, and also he has said he will solve the small boat crisis, which one could argue was a slightly reckless promise, since it seems rather unlikely. I have to admit I'm torn on this, because I think the Rwanda policy is cruel, and I think that the Tories are saying, it's illegal. Well, they are not offering any legal routes for most refugees. If they stop this, they are offering no legal routes for the vast majority of the world's refugees, including people caught up in the war in Sudan at the moment. And that is just not acceptable. On the other hand, I have to say the cost to the British taxpayer for illegal migrants, i.e. those who are not refugees, to be put up in hotels is enormous. So I do think, there has to be a better solution than this. But I understand why, for political reasons, Rishi Sunak has to appear to stand firm.
Jake, Christina outlining the arguments there. What's your stance?
Well, I think, first of all, it's important to note the background to this, which is the Tory wars. We've had this weekend the Conservative Democratic Organisation, this new organisation that's come over to Britain, the conference in Bournemouth, which has been dubbed the Bring Back Boris Conference, with speakers like Priti Patel and Nadine Dorries calling for more support for Boris and for him to be brought back. And so in that context, Rishi Sunak has given an interview to the Sunday Express where he's really trying to burnish his right-wing credentials by opposing the Archbishop of Canterbury on this flagship policy of deporting migrants to Rwanda. Now, in terms of how I feel about it, I think that the important thing is to stop the boats. I don't agree with Christina that there's no legal routes for asylum seekers to come into Britain. There's lots and lots of people from Hong Kong here, lots and lots of Ukrainians and Afghans and others, Syrians, who've all managed to get legal asylum in Britain. I agree with Christina that it could be improved. It could be made more clear to people around the world in Sudan and elsewhere, and it could be streamlined and made easier. But those routes do exist. We do have a proud tradition of accepting refugees in this country, but it can't be right for people to die in the Channel feeding this horrible illegal trade of people smuggling to try and turn up in Britain illegally and unfairly. That has to be stopped. And it seems to me like the Rwanda policy, which is something that the majority of Britons support, is a compassionate and right one, although I would like to see improved routes for asylum, for legal asylum elsewhere.
OK, we're going to move on. We could keep talking about that all night, but we need to move on to get through some of these front pages. Looking at the Mail on Sunday, Kate on the front of all the papers playing the piano in a surprise appearance in Eurovision. She really can't do any wrong, Christina, it seems, at the moment. But Zelensky not appearing.
Yeah, I mean, you're right that Kate can do no wrong, and she is multi-skilled, isn't she? To play the piano like that and look like that, and just appear so poised and perfect all the time. She's a very salutary example and a slightly sobering one for us all, those of us who are not quite as skinny or brilliant at piano playing, or all the things. I mean, she is just. If you were to pick someone to be the spouse of a future monarch, you couldn't really do any better than that if you supported such things. But Rishi Sunak has actually said that he thinks it was a mistake for Eurovision not to allow Zelensky to speak at this. And I think that is right. I think it is a mistake. I mean, Ukraine, the war in Ukraine is the elephant in the room this evening. Obviously, the reason we are hosting it when Ukraine won last year is because it can't be held in Ukraine. One of the hosts tonight is Ukrainian. Ukraine's a very central theme of the whole thing. It's not because Ukraine is a lovely country that happens not to be open at the moment. It is because Putin invaded Ukraine and has launched an absolutely horrific war on this country. And I think not to mention that in this context is somewhat mad. So I disapprove. I think Zelensky should have been allowed to speak tonight.
OK, we're going to move on, Jake. We can perhaps ask you about that in the next hour. But I just want to look at the front of the Sunday Telegraph. We're going to talk a bit about Sir Keir Starmer and Labour. He's going to hand the vote to millions of EU citizens if Labour wins the next general election, the Sunday Telegraph is revealing.
Yes, worrying news, I think. Keir Starmer is allegedly, according to the Sunday Telegraph, proposing to give the vote to EU citizens who have settled status in Britain, but also give the vote to 16-year-olds as well. And those two things alone would lock the Tories out of power for a long time, because the younger people, as we know, are more left-leaning, as many of us know from our own experience of the past. And EU nationals tend to be more left-leaning because of Brexit. And there's also the sort of spectre as well that if Labour were to go into a hung parliament situation and to form a coalition with the Liberal Democrats, the price of that may be proportional representation, which would then mean that the Liberal Democrats would be the kingmakers, meaning that we'd end up with a left-wing coalition basically forever. So it seems to me a cynical move by Keir Starmer to sacrifice the stability of our political system in favour of rigging it so that he can win more, have more of a chance of winning, and potentially lock out the Tories for a long, long time. And at the same time, I think that that system, allowing him to have that kind of victory, will be bad for the country as a whole.
Christina?
Well, the last 13 years have obviously been completely wonderful for the country, as we can see from the state of our public services. And I think if people live here and pay taxes here and contribute to society, then they should be allowed to have a vote on what happens in that society. I also think if you can die for your country, you should be able to vote for, you should be able to decide, who's going to be in power. And finally, I think that proportional representation would be a much, much fairer system. In so many constituencies in the country, in essence, your vote is wasted because you know that it's rigged because of the mathematics that it falls in a certain way. So I don't think this is cynical on Keir Starmer's part. I think we should have proportional representation, and I'm all for it. And I think it seems to me like Telegraph paranoia, actually, to call this an anti-Brexit thing. We've had the Brexit vote. As we know, the vast majority of people in this country now think it was a mistake, but nobody is suggesting rerunning that vote. I wish they would, but they're not.
Jake, do you want to come in quickly? I see you shaking your head.
Yeah, I just think that to be in favour of proportional representation is a bizarre position. If you look at other countries that have proportional representation, it's awful. Israel, for example, at the moment, which is going through horrible political convulsions, is because of the instability that proportional representation gives you. It allows you to bring fringe parties into positions of disproportionate power in government. It causes a lot of backroom sort of horse trading by the political elites out of sight of the electorate in terms of forming coalitions that nobody voted for, and generally sort of tones down the positions of different parties in favour of something that nobody really wanted. So I think that arguing in favour of that is very difficult, particularly given the fact that the last time we were offered anything like that, which was the alternative vote referendum in 2014, 70% of the electorate rejected it. It's not a popular policy in the country, and for very good reason indeed.
OK, just squeeze in one more story, politically related, Christina. It's in the Express. The SNP leader saying the Labour Party is identical to the Tories, vowing to continue campaigning for independence, this coming on the same day that Sir Keir Starmer made his big speech.
Well, I think he should talk to Jake, and I think Jake would quickly disabuse him of that view. And frankly, who cares what he thinks? I'm sorry, but the SNP are a busted flush now. It looks as if Labour are going to win a fair number of seats back from them, maybe even 15 in the next election. That would be good, because the SNP and not just, they've done very badly for the NHS, they've done badly for the education system, but also they want to split Scotland away from the UK, which in my view would be a disaster. So given the scandals that have happened in the SNP recently, you wouldn't expect the party to be doing particularly well at the moment, to be actually saying that there is no difference between Keir Starmer's Labour and the Tories is an utterly ridiculous thing to say, and doesn't bode well for their future if you're a supporter.
OK, we're out of time for this part. We'll speak again in a moment, because coming up after the break, we're going to take a look at this story. It's on the front of the Sunday Times. Nursing union chief in a U-turn, apparently, over a pay deal. We'll talk about that and more in a couple of minutes. Welcome back. Part two of the press preview. Jake and Christina are still with us. At front of the Sunday Times, Jake, nursing union chief in U-turn over pay deal. We know that the RCN originally wanted 19%, didn't they? The government then offered 5% and a lump sum. What's happening now?
Well, the very bad news for Britain is that it looks like we're heading for more nursing strikes. Already there have been 500,000 missed appointments and operations as a result of the last lot of strikes, or last various rounds of strikes, which has had a serious impact on people's health and well-being and their lives and the lives of their loved ones. And now the government offered 5%. Pat Cullen, the General Secretary of the RCN, the Royal College of Nursing, recommended that her members accept that pay rise and call off the strikes, but the members voted against. And so she's come back to demand new talks and done a U-turn, saying that she wants at least 10% pay rises. And the thing is that if you look at the deal they were offered, it wasn't just 5%. It was over 2 financial years with a one-off payment as well of £1,655. So overall, on a consolidated basis, it would amount to 9%, a 9% pay rise. So it's almost 10%. And what they're wanting is more. It seems to me a very thin reason indeed to subject the British people to further missed appointments, to real suffering in terms of missed appointments and even more seriously, missed operations as well. Cancer, intensive care, they've walked out of all of those things in the past. And I think it really is egregious that they're continuing to strike.
Christina?
I think Pat Cullen has messed this up very badly. I think to start off arguing for 19% when everyone knew that was completely unrealistic, and then make a recommendation, and then when 14 other unions have accepted the government's deal, then when her own union have said they don't want to accept it, she now says she made a mistake and wants to go back to the drawing board. I think she just hasn't handled this well. And I think most of us have enormous sympathy for the nurses. They had a terrible time during the pandemic. I think their pay has fallen behind. And I think in an ideal world, they would be paid more, but so would many people. So would most people, in fact. Very few people have had pay rises in line with inflation in the recent years. And the country, thanks to the Tories and Brexit, and of course also the pandemic, but largely, I would say, Tory incompetence. Our economy is in a really bad state, and we just can't pay above inflation pay rises for huge sectors of the huge swathes of the public sector. So I agree with Jake that I think more strikes would be pretty disastrous. A friend of mine had a heart attack the other day on a day of a nurses' strike, and thank goodness, she survived. But who knows? It could very easily have been the case that there wasn't enough care or good enough care available for her in that day. It's a very frightening time to be old, frail, or getting in a car, or doing any normal activity where you can have an accident. And I do think Pat Cullen really needs to talk to her members at this conference and say, look, I'm sorry, these are not ideal times. We need to accept the deal that we've been offered.
OK, let's move on to the story in the Sunday Telegraph. Liz Truss is heading to Taiwan, Jake. She's going to be the first former Prime Minister to visit Taiwan since Margaret Thatcher in the 1990s.
That's right. I mean, there is a sense, it seems, in the Tory party that she's gone slightly rogue in going to visit Taiwan in this way, as if she was a cabinet minister or a policy maker, and she's not anymore. And it's a very, very diplomatically sensitive visit to make. When Nancy Pelosi, from America, went over there recently, it sparked a lot of saber rattling from China in terms of military operations to threaten Taiwan. So it's a very, very fragile situation. I happen to think that her position is the right one. I share her hawkish perspective on China. I think that we need to get real about China's creeping dominance of the globe and the underhand ways in which they seek to assert that dominance or gain it. I think her policy or her approach is the right one, but I think there's a sense in Tory circles that she's rather going off-piste and going freelance here. In fact, in Tim Shipman's column tomorrow, he said that one source said to him that she seems to think she's indestructible, even though she's been destroyed, which sort of hit home with...
Yeah, it was John Major, wasn't it, Christina, that said when the curtain falls, it's time to leave the stage. She doesn't seem to necessarily have heard that quote.
I think perhaps she should be put in a straitjacket of some kind. I mean, she did her very best to wreck the economy, and people are still paying a price for that now. And now she seems determined to get us all burnt to a frazzle in a nuclear war. Of course, China is not Mother Teresa, and we should be very alarmed by all kinds of things it's doing. But making trips to Taiwan and constantly talking about freedom, as if these things were straightforward. It's a very dangerous thing to do. It's naive, it's dangerous, and it's deeply unhelpful to diplomatic relations. There are channels for these things. You do them with the authorization of a prime minister as foreign secretary, or when you're prime minister. If not, you leave well alone. And I mean, I think Liz Truss, she's not just gone rogue. I think this is really dangerous stuff, and I think somebody really needs to tell her to get a grip.
OK. Christina, Jake, thank you very much. We'll leave you to catch up on the Eurovision scores, and we'll speak to you again in half an hour.